this is Robert Bonomo, and this is Conversations from Carthage. Our guest today is Brahim Boughalmi, sorry about that, a lecturer at MSB. Welcome.
Thank you.
So, you were a lecturer here at MSB, and you were a Fulbright Scholar.
I was in the US at Penn State, particularly, 2013, 2014.
Excellent, excellent. So that was an interesting time to leave Tunisia, no? Right after, or a year or so after the revolution, no?
Yes, actually. It was difficult, it was challenging, but it had been my dream to get the Fulbright Scholarship and finally be in the country that I had studied about for 4 years in college, because my major was linguistics, but I also studied American history.
Mm-hmm.
So it was something I had wanted to do for a while. So when I got the scholarship, I could not say no to it, even though it was a time when I really wanted to be here.
Wanted to be here. And what was your impression of Western Pennsylvania? That's very sort of Mid-American.
Frankly, my knowledge about Pennsylvania stopped at the fact that it was one of the first colonies, frankly. I'm a bit ashamed to admit it. However, it was that and what we got from the movie of Sylvester Stallone.
Oh, Rocky.
Well, Rocky.
That's right, he was
Exactly.
from Philadelphia.
Yeah, exactly. The steps and him running, all the way up there and then, cheering his win. And funny enough, when I went to Philadelphia the first time, and actually Philadelphia was the place where I landed when I got to the US, one of the first things that I did was look for the steps and do the same thing he did, even though I wasn't that big a fan of the movie.
But you wanted to...
I wanted to live the Rocky fantasy.
Well, one of the things I was really interested in, so what do you think the reporting on the revolution was like in the United States? What did they get right and what did they get completely wrong?
I don't think I can talk about the United States in general. However, if I describe it in Pennsylvania, I was surprised at how little people knew about what was going on in Tunisia. Because remember, after the Tunisian Revolution was sparked, Egypt happened sometime after.
Right,
it was like a couple of months.
Right.
A lot of people knew about what was going on in Egypt. No one pretty much knew that Tunisia was first and that our Egyptian friends were following our footsteps. And that was a bit surprising to me, because when I was here, I thought that it was the event in the world, and I thought that everybody would be following. The way you would follow, for example, like elections in the US, or like when something happens in France or whatever, but it was not the case, at least in Pennsylvania.
Right, I see what you mean. So you see it that they focus much more on Egypt.
On Egypt, yeah. There was a lot of focus on Egypt.
But what about the reporting on Tunisia? Because there was some reporting in the mainstream media, I remember, following that story.
Yeah.
What do you think? What did they get? How right or wrong did they get it? How did you feel from the reporting?
Frankly, my main, I would say issue, I don't know if it was an issue, but my main concern was the fact that it wasn't covered as much as it should have been. Also, there wasn't much focus on the fact that there was a revolution, that a change was happening, and it was on a large scale. It was mostly about security and the fact that Tunisia was not a safe place to be.
Right. I remember especially say from the New York Times, which I would read, say, on a daily basis at that time, there was a big focus on democracy, but there wasn't much of a focus on the cultural transition that was going on.
No, there wasn't. Yeah.
And why do you think that was?
And even, the democracy aspect, I think that started to be covered when, it was around the time when we had our first election, the parliamentary election. And I think that everybody was focusing on the fact that democracy is finally happening, but it was considered from the broad sense of democracy, and there wasn't any consideration for the local factors that played into what was going on. One of them was the fact that the Ben Ali regime prohibited any sort of religious identity at that point. The regime presented itself to the world as an Arab Muslim country. However, in reality, it wasn't. There was a huge detachment from religion. People were not allowed to practice it in total freedom, which caused a lot of frustration, and that played a huge part into what happened in the first election.
Right.
And that was not covered a lot, I think.
Yeah, and that was a surprise for me when I came to Tunisia. That was not talked about at all, almost.
No.
It wasn't talked about, that the
was
religious
completely
element wasn't. What was that? Because you were here in 2011, right?
Yeah.
In 2012.
Yeah.
What was that transition like? From the cultural level?
From the cultural level. Like, you mean when the revolution was sparked or before that?
Okay, yeah, let's go to the beginning. Can you tell me about the beginnings of it from your perspective? What happened and what were the sort of the initial...
So the beginnings, I would say, it was partly cultural. If we could include religion
Yeah.
and the culture aspect
Definitely.
of it. And the other part of it was economic as well. Like, you could feel the pressure rising toward the end of 2010 because the economy started to basically be destroyed bit by bit.
In around 2010.
Yeah, toward the end of 2010. Like, prices were rising. Tourism was basically, it wasn't dead, but it wasn't the way it should have been.
Mhm.
It was very basic in the sense that we had a couple of tourists, who came here for the beach and the sun.
Mhm.
And that was it. Like, the rest of the country was discarded. And it's a really rich part of the country to be seen, historically and culturally. Also, people were starting to be fed up with how religious oppression, maybe the opposite of it in this case, how bad it was, because women could not wear the veil, they could go to jail for that, they were beaten, they were humiliated, they were not allowed in schools, men could not pray in mosques, and it was all
So-
under the name of security.
Right.
So, like, you could feel the pressure rising toward the end, and like, there were even conversations among certain groups about a possible revolution. I remember I went to Nafavri, which is one of the main, one of the main institutions that played a part in
Mhm.
the revolution. The presence of policemen in my university at that point was a regular thing.
What was that like? What were they? Were they plainclothes policemen or uniformed?
No, there were, yeah. There were confrontations with students as well. But we got used to it at some point. Like, the idea that the university would shut its doors and they wouldn't let us out for a couple of hours was a normal thing.
Mhm.
Seeing protests in the university was also a normal thing. So we were like, we grew up in that kind of, so it wasn't a strange thing to have. But I remember very distinctly we're having lunch maybe like a month or so before there was any talk about an actual revolution. Two of my friends and I were talking about, what if we had a revolution right now? Like, what would happen in Tunisia? And we didn't all agree that we should have it. But like, the idea was present. It wasn't a strange thing.
It was something that was bubbling, no?
Yeah. No, it felt like being in a pressure cooker, basically. Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about the religious oppression? Because that's something I think in the West is not discussed a lot. That we see it more as a political revolution, but it really was a cultural revolution. So, for example, if people wanted to pray or women wanted to wear a veil, what were the restrictions and how was it looked at socially?
I think it was cultural, political, and also religious in that sense, because I think all three elements played a part in it. But if we want to focus on the religious part, it was all in the name of security.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't really have, the majority of the population here is Muslim,
Mm-hmm.
and it is their right to practice their religion. It is their right to have access to it. There wasn't any of that, frankly. And I think that contributed to, in a great deal, to the fact that we have a lot of religious extremists now,
Mm-hmm.
or we had them The people who left Tunisia and went to ISIS, I think they are the result of that system.
Sure.
They are the result of that oppression. Because when you grow up in a system that doesn't allow you to be in touch with a part of your identity, when you get access to it, you're going to go to the extreme.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what happened to us, I think. The veil was not allowed.
In any public institution?
In any public, it wasn't even allowed in the streets. Like, any woman could be stopped at any time in the streets by policemen, be humiliated, would be taken to the police station to sign a document that says, I would never wear it again, and if I do, I take responsibility of what is going to happen next.
Wow.
And it didn't matter what age the woman was, frankly. In high school, I remember in high school, we would smuggle the girls who wore the veil into the building because the dean would sometimes even stand at the main gate of the university and would not allow any veiled girl. So the tall guys would like maybe walk,
right,
side
block
by
her
side,
from the
exactly,
guys
have
who-
her behind so that the dean wouldn't see her and that she would be able to get in.
Yeah. I think that's a story that didn't really, we never got.
I don't think so, no.
Yeah.
I think there was a lot of focus on the democratic transition, and you had the dictator, he's gone now, and there wasn't, I don't think there was a lot of deep analysis.
Mm-hmm.
Frankly, and I'm talking here about the mainstream media, because
Yeah.
being here, I knew a lot of journalists who tried to give an authentic image of what was going on.
No, definitely. So what were some of the other factors, you as a student,
Yeah.
before the revolution, what were some of the other factors you think that really played into this, apart from the religious?
Economy. We never really had a strong economy. It was like the dinar had a good value, but it was going down. It wasn't the same pace after the revolution, unfortunately, but that's what happens when when a system collapses. So the value of the dollar was not stable, though it didn't deteriorate as fast as it has been deteriorating. Prices were going up.
Mm-hmm.
People were getting to be frustrated with that, and I'm talking about the average person here. And that was the main cause of frustration with the system.
And then in the West, of course, there was a lot of talk about corruption, that there was high levels of corruption and that this was kind of making the public anxious or...
Unfortunately, I would say, it pains me to admit it, but at that time there was a lot of normalization of corruption.
Of corruption, no?
Right?
Sure.
We had different names for it. We didn't call it corruption, we didn't call it bribery.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We did our best not to confront the situation, and I think we lived in complete denial about it.
Mm-hmm.
And it was actually the abnormal thing to say, no, I don't want to pay a bribe.
Sure.
Right? What caused a frustration, I think, it wasn't the corruption in the everyday life. It was the fact that the family of the president's wife was taken over by means of corruption. So when they talked about frustration caused by corruption, it was the Trabelsi family being so corrupt and trying to take over, as much as they could of the country.
Because corruption really is just a tax, no? It's just another tax.
It is, yeah, it was, at least, yeah.
So, I think you can look at it two ways, no? It's another tax, it's a way to augment incomes.
Exactly.
It doesn't necessarily have to be this horrible, evil thing.
Yeah.
But when it reaches a certain level,
Exactly. Yeah,
it's almost like
exactly.
a tipping point,
Yeah,
that
it was the tipping point. I think
Yeah.
when the Trabelsi family started, frankly, I'm not going to claim that I knew much about it, especially at that point, but as far as I remember, there were a lot of conversations about them trying to take over businesses,
Mhm.
and they were savage about it. Those are the conversations that people had secretly and behind closed doors, and even then they were afraid of having those conversations.
Yeah, and that's another interesting topic. What happened to public conversations before the revolution and after? The typical conversation that you could have,
Yeah.
say, in a coffee shop, or... It's changed, no?
Oh my God, it's 180. We lived in a time when we could not say his name in public. That's how scared we were.
Really?
Oh yeah, like when you said the president's name in public, you would be afraid that the person next to you was going to be the person behind you going to jail for talking about the president in public.
Because I was here for the last elections,
Yeah.
and people just couldn't stop talking about politics. It
Yeah.
was they were really engaged.
Oh yeah.
It's,
Yeah.
for me, it's hard to imagine people here not talking about
Yeah.
politics.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I think it's a natural reaction of what happened. Like for 50 years, I did not grow up in the time of Bourguiba, but things live after the person's death, and whether you like him or hate him, whether you think he did the best things that could be done to Tunisia or not, we cannot deny the fact that he was a dictator.
Could you just do me one favor for people who aren't familiar with who he was? Just give us just the 30-second.
He was the first president of Tunisia right after the decolonization.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And what's his legacy for people your age?
I think for people my age, there is a divide. Because a lot of people still perceive him as the ultimate hero for Tunisia. The one who liberated it, the one who is the reason behind the fact that we have an educational system, we have a healthcare system, and it's free for everybody. They see him as the person who liberated women.
Right.
But there's the other side of it that wants to see him as a human being who made mistakes, who did some good things, and they want to see him as a dictator, but not draw him in the picture of a devil. There's, I think, part of the country that want to do that too. Like they want to see him as a devil who's the reason behind everything that is not going well in the country now.
Sure.
Yeah.
But I just, from my initial impression, anecdotally, I would say most people seem to speak pretty well of him.
Yeah.
The image, the public image
Yeah.
of somebody who's respected,
Yeah.
is sort of almost the ideal type of.
True. He's
Of
the
leader,
image
no?
of the father, that everybody wants to have, and I think a big chunk of the population now are looking whenever we have a presidential election, or whenever we're talking about, because we've had a few since the revolution. Whenever we talk about the new president, we always compare him to Bourguiba. He is the standard of what a president should be, and most people are still looking for that father figure that was in Bourguiba.
And you see that in a lot of states, no? For example, if you look at in Russia, people look back to Stalin.
True.
No, in China, people look back to Mao.
Turkey at Turk.
Exactly. Vietnam, they look to Ho Chi Minh. So I mean, you see this sort of that figure that sort of initiates the.
There was Roosevelt to some extent. George Washington.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
But no, but you're right. The modern American state,
Yeah.
I think people would focus basically on Roosevelt.
Roosevelt. Yeah.
And it's interesting when you look at the modern American state, it's sort of born with Roosevelt and maybe dies with Kennedy in a sense.
Yeah.
There's that traumatic event
Yeah.
where something
Yeah.
happens in the state and
Yeah.
it moves over this way.
But Bourguiba is certainly that for most Tunisians, at least, I would say.
And just quickly, what was Ben Ali's relationship with Bourguiba?
He worked for him for a long time. He
was a
had
minister,
different
right?
positions. Yeah, he was a minister more than once. He had different positions, and they say he was one of his he was in his
Inner
small
circle.
Yeah. But eventually he kind of kicked him out.
Right. But in a sense, it was a bit of an extension of that
Yeah.
regime, no?
Yeah. Not everybody agrees that he was the person to lead that extension, but that's what happened. And he actually was horrible to him after he overthrew him.
Towards the end, it was.
Yeah, towards the end. Like Bourguiba's funeral, for example, it was televised, but people could not go out in the street. They couldn't really grieve over his death.
Good.
So his funeral was televised, but there was a lot of security. People were not allowed in the streets. They could not grieve over his death. They could not voice their maybe even anger towards how the end of his life was. And we only knew about that after the revolution. Because what we got, there was a lot of restriction on information and access to information during Ben Ali's time, so we didn't know anything. The only thing we knew was there was a funeral, some Arab leaders were here. I remember watching it with my parents. And that's all. Nobody knew more than that.
Were there other things that you learned after the revolution that were surprising?
Frankly, after the revolution, there was a huge influx of information.
Maybe
and
too
it
much,
felt
no?
like it felt like being in a whirlwind where like you were hit by a constant, influx of information. We didn't really know what was right and what was wrong. There was a lot of stories coming up from every person who was involved in the system in any shape, form, or way. There were stories about how much money the family had, their real estate, what happened with Bourguiba toward the end. There was also a small part about the end of the Bey era in Tunisia, which was like the era where
The Ottoman
Tunisia
period,
was an Ottoman state. So there was a lot. There was a lot that was surprising. Frankly, I don't know how much of it was facts and how much of it was made up. But I think it's now we're getting to the part where we're rewriting our history and trying to figure out a way to convey it in a truthful manner.
Which is not easy, no?
No.
So it must have been a very exciting time.
Yes.
Especially you were right out of school,
Yes.
no?
Yeah. I graduated June 2011. The system collapsed January 14th.
Right in time, you graduated.
2011, yeah. And the revolution started December 17th. Like it was an actual revolution. There was an actual talk about a revolution December 17th.
And why that date? Why do you remember that date?
Because again, that's when a lot of us, it hit us that it's actually a revolution. And the protests are not just a bunch of people who are angry in the streets and breaking things down. Something is actually happening, and people were calling for the system to collapse, basically.
But what happened? Because that's a really interesting point. Where does a protest change into a revolution? Can you remember some aspect, some demand? Was there a special demand maybe made that changed? Because you've mentioned that date.
Yeah.
More than
so
once.
here's the thing. I think in 2000, so the whole thing, the revolution, we started talking about a revolution December 17th, basically. But I think the first actual spark was in Gafsa 2008. There was revolt it was related to the phosphate factory, right? And the city was surrounded by the military for a long time. We're talking about weeks.
Wow.
And people were protesting. I hope I'm not wrong on this one, but I believe people died. I don't have numbers, and we did not hear about any of that. I don't remember how old I was at the point, but I remember we were watching because we did not have access to YouTube. It was one of the things, the internet was...
In 2008 there was no access to
Oh no,
YouTube?
we didn't even know what YouTube looked like.
Did you have access to
complete
Facebook?
Censorship. 2008, yeah, Facebook had just started.
Just began.
And it was not a threat.
Right.
And it wasn't that popular in Tunisia. It became a threat, I think, toward 2009, 10. And they restricted access to it around that time.
Okay, by 2010 they started
Yeah,
restrictions
they restricted
on
access
Facebook.
to Facebook for a certain amount of time. So yeah, we watched what was going on YouTube through proxy because we didn't have access to it. And it was the scariest thing ever because it felt like there were cameras in the room. We were in my friend's bedroom, but it felt like there were cameras in the room, and we actually thought we were going to get arrested and spend the rest of our lives in prison watching them. So that's when I think the first real spark,
Began.
a big spark,
With
began.
the protests in 2008
With
at the phosphate factory.
Yeah. And I think that the country did not calm down completely from that point on. And when Bouazizi set himself on fire,
Right.
what was reported to us in the news was the fact that it was his family members that were angry, and then it turned into violence acts. But it wasn't until around December 17th when we realized, okay.
But how much was that a spark when he set himself on fire?
Yeah.
Because in the West we had an image of that being the spark for the whole Arab Spring. Maybe that's an exaggeration, or...
I wouldn't call it exaggeration. I think it was the tipping point, if we want to use that term again.
Yeah.
I think that was the point it was the turning point. Because from that moment on, the snowball effect happened. And it was fast. It wasn't like 2008 and then something else happened 2010. It was from that moment on, things started happening and protests started sparking in different regions in the country. And they did not get to the capital until later. And 2014 was the day, January 14th was the day that everybody came together. And it wasn't just a bunch of people. It was lawyers and UGT and UGT and doctors and like people from different parts of the society that came together. And they all said the famous slogan, Dégage.
Can you say it again?
Dégage.
And what does that mean?
Get out.
Ah, right,
Yeah.
right. So you think the use of that slogan is really the beginning of...
I wouldn't say the beginning, but it was.
It's pretty clear.
The one, yeah. I mean, like, it couldn't get clearer than that. It couldn't possibly get clearer than that. And that's, I think, when he maybe realized, okay, I need to fear for. We don't know what happened at that point. Like there isn't any actual reporting on what happened. We still do not know, but we know that he left that day.
And what do people? What's the consensus idea of why he did leave?
I don't think there's a consensus. There are people who say he was tricked into leaving and he didn't want to.
Did he think he could come back?
A lot of people said that he thought he was going to come back.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people want to believe that he knew it was it for him and he needed to leave, but nobody really knows for sure. I guess maybe some people do, but that's not the count.
No.
Yeah.
I just remember that picture from the hospital room.
Yeah.
Ben Ali in the hospital room. That was a powerful picture. I distinctly remember that picture. It was a very powerful picture.
This was before the revolution.
Yeah. I guess the photographer was on the other side of the bed, and it was a very good picture.
Yeah.
And it kind of hit you like.
Yeah, he had his pictures everywhere. Like if you had a coffee shop and you did not put his picture up, you should expect policemen to stop by at some point and be like, okay, why isn't it there? Do you have any political affiliation that could go against him? That's how bad it was.
So it's interesting, you go from this point in the revolution, and then you go to, of all places, Western Pennsylvania. Couldn't be, I don't think you could dream of a more different place.
No. No.
It's a very, calm place. I have a lot of family in Western Pennsylvania. I know those people. It's a very...
It was especially State College.
Yes.
I don't think I've ever been to a place that was more peaceful than State College. Like I remember one day, there was like they had a newspaper. I can't remember its name, but it was like the official State College newspaper. Yeah, and the main title in it, a man attempted to break into a house. Attempted. And I was like,
unsuccessful.
Unsuccessful. And I was so happy to be in an environment like that because I was like, this is amazing. Like you could leave your house and not be scared that somebody. But I had to laugh because it wasn't completely unsafe to be in Tunisia when I left because it was 2013. So we still had some security concerns because it was basically boiling. But I would still go back to those insecurity concerns and deal with them rather than deal with Ben Ali for another year or so.
Sure.
But going from that and going from like being the guardians of our own neighborhoods at night, like the whole night we would stay up with knives and we would have a bonfire, for the whole night because it was freezing cold. The first few days when we didn't have policemen and the military was trying to do the best they could. Going from that to the main title, somebody tried to break into a house, that was a huge change. I mean, it was positive, but it was still a change.
Now, you weren't there during that whole scandal with Joe Paterno, were you?
I was there right after.
Right after?
Yeah, it was still fresh.
For them, that's about as close as they get to a revolution.
Yeah.
Kicking out the foot.
It was still fresh, and it was the talk of the town.
Yeah.
Yeah. I frankly, I didn't read about it. I didn't know that it was happening. Everything I knew about it was from the people who were there when it happened. Yeah.
And so how did you find, for example, university life, the difference between, because you were a Fulbright Scholar.
I was.
So you had been at a university here, and then you transferred there. Just in general, not about revolutions, but just the student life in general, how different was it?
Can I be completely honest?
Yes, please. That's why we're here. If you're not honest, it's boring.
Yeah, I honestly thought it was unfair for the students in the U.S.
Unfair?
Unfair. The Tunisian school system, with all of its issues, as a student, I never really had to care about needing to work 2 jobs.
Oh, I see what you mean.
2 part-time jobs. Yeah. I never really thought about, am I going to be able to pay my tuition fees?
Student loans.
Student loans.
In
right?
Tunisia, students don't have,
the
college students don't
the
have
concept
student
is
loans.
strange, and I had known about it before going to the US, but actually being there and seeing people who were actually dealing with it was a bit traumatizing to me. So going from that system, and again, like we had our own issues, we still are dealing with a lot of issues in it, but as students, as people who were 20 and 18 and 19, we never really needed to care about issues like student loan, or am I going to be able to have 2 jobs and sit steady and worry about extracurricular activities for my CV and worry about my CGPA because it had to be as high as it could be. And to see American students dealing with that, it was, frankly, there was a part of me that felt sorry for many of my students. There was this particular student, her name is Julia, who was studying Arabic and she was studying Spanish and she had some other extracurricular activities and she had 2 part-time jobs. And the fact that she would walk in on Monday morning at 9 to my class with a big smile on her face, with her homework done, and getting ready for a busy day at the age of 19, to me, that was beyond what my mind could grasp, frankly. And I still look at her as a symbol of strength, but I don't think any student should deal with that. And I think that the school system in the US is fantastic in many ways, like the content, the competencies that you work with in terms of professors. At Penn State, I felt like I was really lucky to be at Penn State. However, the aspect of student loans and tuition fees and having to be really over competitive at that age, I don't think that's something that.
So just to be clear, in Tunisia, university students, public university, their fees are negligible. No?
They're negligible. I had to pay, if I paid my tuition fees for the whole year, it was like 180 dinars.
Okay, so it's
and in dollars, that's like $70, basically.
Now, what about the admissions? Are the admissions different? Say for a Penn State.
Yeah.
I think Penn State, it's not extremely easy to get in. No, I mean there are certain requirements. Not everyone can get into Penn State.
I mean, I got in as a Fulbright Scholar, so my knowledge about a regular student's admission.
But for example, in Tunisia, is it difficult, the admittance?
In Tunisia, we don't have universities. We do have universities where it's difficult to be admitted, but it's not the university itself, it's the field.
Oh, the faculty.
Yeah, so for example, the most difficult one to get into is medicine. Like you have to have a really high GPA or score, we call it score, to get to med school, right? We also have architecture, that one is a bit challenging. But it's not about the university itself. The university is like a secondary element in that.
But even medical school, the fees would be negligible.
Yeah, they would be negligible still.
Yeah, it's a very strange American idea that you would allow 22, 23-year-olds to graduate from the university in debt, 60, 80, $100,000.
Exactly, $100,000. Yeah. It scares me now to think that I could have $100,000 in debt.
But when you ask a 20-year-old, so do you need $5,000? What are they going to say? No,
exactly.
Generally they say yes.
Yeah, exactly. So for a student who's 21 and has $30,000 or $50,000 in debt, that to me is unimaginable.
Now, what about the political awareness? Because I would assume that the students around your age were very politically aware here.
Yeah, we were the generation of the revolution, so we were all about politics. it wasn't the same in the US.
Yeah, it would. I think probably not extremely interesting in politics.
No. And to me, I understood the fact that politics was such a topic that people avoided to talk about. Like, it's not easy to have a discussion about politics in the US. Maybe now, I don't know, with the current.
I would say now it's gotten to the point where it's become very difficult because either, well, we become more isolated and polarized.
Okay.
So when you're in sort of a safe space,
Yeah.
you can, if you're their supporter of one side or the other, then you can talk. But that sort of opens, it was something generally that we didn't talk about.
Yeah.
Like, I remember working for United Parcel Service, which was the Teamsters Union.
Okay.
So most of the workers were in the Teamsters, if not all. We never talked about politics.
Okay.
And we were basically all Democrats. I mean, it was a union
Even
job.
then, you didn't talk about politics.
It just wasn't polite.
Okay.
It was just something you stayed away from.
Yeah.
But now, I've noticed in some corporate trainings, people are jumping into politics, and people my age, it's a little strange. It's like, let's talk about sports, the weather.
Yeah, then we've taken back by that,
Yeah, that part has changed.
Okay.
Considerably.
Yeah. No, I noticed that people would shy away from political discussions, it wasn't weird to me, but in comparison to what was going on in Tunisia, we had like a politics diarrhea in Tunisia after the revolution. Everybody had something to say, and everybody wanted to participate, and it was a big mess, but it was a beautiful mess because everybody was just letting it out. Like, it was like all of the oppression that like we had. So it was good in many ways. It was messy, but good in many ways. So it was slightly surprising for me to be in a democratic country and see people like stay away from politics as much as possible. But I mean, I understood because I came from a place where like it was so, even when we were happy to talk about it, it was really frustrating because it's not something easy to discuss. It's still not easy to discuss. It brings a lot of frustration. It brings a lot of, I guess, assumptions and ready-made ideas, and that's not easy to deal with.
What about, is there any nostalgia for the old regime at this point? For certain aspects
On this side of the table?
No, I just mean in general.
In general,
because you do hear it occasionally.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Especially people more my age.
Yeah, unfortunately there's that, and I insist on unfortunately because yes, maybe the generation that preceded us are more keen on wanting to have that back, because I think they didn't know any different.
Sure.
It was what they grew up on. They didn't have the access to information we had growing up. So for a long time they perceived that as their truth, as the only thing that existed. And for the average person, let's face it, like, not so much matter. Like if you're talking to a father who has 3 kids and wants to provide for them, he's not going to care so much about freedom of speech. A woman is not going to care so much about women's rights in comparison to providing for her kids, right? So for them, it mattered way more, and it still matters way more to have political economic stability and security to a certain extent. They don't care about more than that. People in my generation, sadly, some of them are nostalgic to that because they lived in good conditions to a certain extent. Like people in big cities like myself in Tunis or Bizerte to a certain extent, Sousse, Monastir, we didn't have a lot of issues to think about. We lived in nice conditions, right? And if I think selfishly about it, I also would want Ben Ali to come back because my life was stable. So that part of my generation, I think, is thinking in a selfish way because all they want is this sort of stability they had when Ben Ali was here without thinking about the 70% of the country that was completely discarded, discriminated against. And I would argue with anyone who doesn't think that there was systematic discrimination between the regions in Tunisia. You can see clearly, like you could even draw the line that divides Tunisia to 2 parts.
And what were the different sides? Was it rural? versus urban?
Yeah, I mean, it was mostly like rural, like the interior part of the country versus the coast to a great extent, because even the coast had parts in it that was not protected, they were not really developed. But there were a few cities on the coast that benefited from the Ben Ali regime, and he was using those cities because those were the image that he wanted to portray to the world, right? The rest of the country was in a horrible, horrible situation in many ways. You look at schools, for example. You go to any school in any of the inner regions of the country and you compare it to one of the schools on the coast, the difference is staggering in terms of equipment, in terms of access to the school, the state of the building itself, and that applies to all of the other aspects of the lives of people in those regions. So I think people of my generation who are nostalgic to Ben Ali, they're thinking about their own interest more than anything else, because they were lucky enough to be in a city that Ben Ali was using, so they had a nice life, right? They were raised like a nice sheep, no freedom whatsoever, but I'm going to feed you, I'm going to provide you with nice things.
Right, and it was more the urban, because you do get that from a lot of people, urban people, middle class people.
Yeah.
A certain nostalgia, no?
Yeah, you do. And like again, like I think if you think about it from a selfish perspective, it makes sense.
Sure.
Because like the selfish side of a human being wants that, and who cares about others, right? However, the part of my generation that is thinking about the country as a whole, they're thinking about us as a community that needs to support each other. They're happy dealing, we have been consistently happy dealing with lack of security, lack of economic stability, not because it's fun to be in those situations, but because it is for the greater cause, which is the whole country. And I think we should all be willing to go through that together as a community to be able to have a balance between all the citizens in this country, because it is our right as citizens, regardless of where we're born in, to have the same opportunities as everybody else. I think, fine, like I'm happy with a person being born to, parents who could provide them with a lot of money when they're starting their career. That's life, that's how it is. However, if I'm talking about a 7-year-old kid, I don't think the amount of money your parents have, or the city you're born in, or how close you are to the system, should factor into what kind of life you have.
At least not that much, no.
Exactly. A 7-year-old person should have good education, they should be provided with health care, whether they are in Tatooine, Bizerte, Tunis, or whatever city we're talking about.
Sure.
Yeah.
What has been the most frustrating part of democracy?
Getting to hear ill-informed people voice their opinions carelessly.
Uninformed people.
Yeah.
Carelessly.
Yeah,
But isn't that
yeah.
part of democracy? Isn't that the
It
price
is,
you
no,
pay?
it is, and I guess we accept it, but we cannot deny the fact that it's frustrating. And there are days, like on a Monday morning when you're, you're exhausted and you're going to work and like you'd rather be in your bed and you hear somebody going on and on and on about, the situation and how much they love Ben Ali and all of that, like you go, like this is the last thing I want to hear today.
Yeah.
But it is what it is, like democracy is that, and we have to accept it in all of its aspects, with its positives and the negative aspects of it, because without glorifying it, it is not the most perfect system to have, but it is for now the best system that we could work with as human beings.
Sure. Now, you're involved a lot with civil society.
I wouldn't say a lot, but I'm involved as much as I can.
As much as you can,
Yeah.
though.
Yeah. I do the best I can.
Now, it's really interesting. In American democracy, you see the decline of civil society, say since the 1950s,
And
pretty
unions.
significantly. And unions.
And unions, yeah.
Together. But it's pretty significant on all levels.
Yeah.
And not just churches and religions and unions, but even clubs, Little League, all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
You really see the people's ability to participate.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we're seeing the repercussions of that. People are less invested in what they consider to be a stable system.
Yeah, you're talking about the US?
I'm talking about the United States, yeah.
I think so. I think, like, looking at the example of Tunisia, the civil society has been sort of like the checks and balances of our government. It's the system that we use to put the government on track when, you know, it takes a different route, you know, basically. And I think the civil society unions, when they are doing their job the way they're supposed to be doing them, because I guess the lesson that we can learn now is that unions can be can abuse their power too.
No, of course.
And we've seen it over and over again. So I think that even in an established democracy like the US, you still need those, you know, those components
And it is
to
interesting,
counterbalance
yeah,
the government.
when we most need a union, in a certain sense,
Yeah.
with the onset of artificial intelligence, in many industries are becoming less labor intensive, it's when we see the unions at their
Kind of
weakest.
disappear.
This is probably the point where you most need a union,
I think so.
and it's not
exactly,
there.
Yeah, and it's not there. Exactly. Yeah. I agree.
Who's
with
going to
100%
negotiate
on
for
that.
you? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Especially, I mean, that the transition now needs somebody to stand up for workers. You know, in the past they did not have any laws that protected them. That's why they needed unions to push for those laws. Now we have technology, you know, kind of invading their territory, and they need somebody to stand up for them.
It's very interesting. My grandfather worked on the subway,
Yeah.
split shifts, with 1 day off a month. So you imagine, 6
Wow.
hours in the morning,
Okay.
6 hours in the afternoon, and you got 1 day off a month. And the
That's
unionization,
brutal.
that's brutal. And with a union, that was reduced to 40 hours. So I mean, when you think, what did unions do? They did a lot.
Oh, they did a
People
lot.
forget that.
They
And
do.
people
They do.
really,
Yeah.
really were
They do.
abused.
Yeah, they do.
But now, you know, it's a different situation. It's not they're being abused, there's just no work.
Yeah.
But can you tell us a little bit about what kind of civil society organizations are you working with here?
Okay, so sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, because it before, in the Ben Ali regime, was there much civil society?
No. No.
Not a lot, no.
We had a couple of organizations that catered to Ben Ali a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And they were the only couple that were allowed to exist. The only civil society there was his own political party. And I remember toward the end of my 4 years in college, I had so many people tell me, now that you're graduating, you need to be a member of the party. You need to get your card so that's going to help you get a job. So that was the major, you know, like thing that we had that resembled civil society.
Was to join the party.
To join the party.
But that really is, in a sense, it is civil society, no? I mean, it's sort of a extra governmental organization that...
Yeah, I guess so, yeah. I mean, it's more party.
Yeah.
It's not really, most people had their card, they kind of, you know, clapped for him when they needed, they were invited to events. Some of them never really went. But that was the closest thing we had, and there were a couple of other organizations that were allowed, but they were under a lot of scrutiny, and they had to cater a little bit for him.
Oh.
And they were mainly two organizations about children.
Oh, okay.
So they didn't really have much to do with like politics or like culture and anything closely related to the political life. But after the revolution, there was an explosion of NGOs, and the civil society started to form. A month after, it was around a month after the revolution started, I was approached by a friend of mine, Ashraf Awadi, and he told me about this organization that him and a couple of other friends were thinking about forming, and it was to fight corruption in Tunisia, which was really a long shot at that point. Like, it was a laughable matter, frankly. Like, whenever we talked about it to people, they would laugh in our faces. I got on board, we started, and a year after, you know, like we got the organization off the ground, a bit less than a year even, we observed the first parliamentary election, and we started gaining momentum, and now it is one of the main organizations in Tunisia in the civil society, and it is the one that has taken the role of fighting corruption in Tunisia.
That's great. So you were really able to make some inroads, no? Make some progress.
Oh,
It's
yeah,
not something
yeah,
that
yeah.
happens overnight, obviously, but
There were, I mean, in the last few years, in this field in particular, iWatch, I think, has managed to make so much progress. Like, iWatch is one of the main reasons why the conversation about corruption in Tunisia now exists, right? It is the main reason why some laws were passed against corruption. It is the reason behind the fact that a lot of Tunisians see it as a normal thing to hold everybody in the government accountable, even the president himself. Because iWatch sued the former president, Sipsi. And that was unheard of before. Like, the idea of suing the president was something that, like, you couldn't even think about. So I think iWatch has managed to shift the paradigm on corruption, on the topic of corruption in general in Tunisia.
that's excellent. So that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Did you observe any civil society in the United States when you were there?
Not really.
Not really.
And
No.
I think no. It's my bad because I did not do my research about it. In the beginning, I was so preoccupied with, like, adjusting to life in the U.S. and, you know, having, like, more or less some stability. And then I was so focused on studying and teaching that I didn't have any time to think about anything else. Even though I went there thinking about what I could join. But when I got there, I discovered that I'm not going to be able to stop thinking about what's going on in Tunisia.
Sure.
So I became more of an addict, and I was following things every second of every day. And whenever there was a protest or whenever there was something going on, I would lose my mind because I wanted to be here protesting or, you know, like, being part of any movement that is going on that I believed in. So I didn't really get invested so much in the civil society in the US. It's my fault. The other organization that I'm also a member of is Carthage-Tunisian, and its work has nothing to do with what iWatch does. It focuses more on the Tunisian identity and the Tunisian culture, and we do a lot of work about digitizing our heritage, because a lot of it, unfortunately, is spoken. There wasn't any preservation of it, and which was a policy by, I guess, the dictatorship we lived under for a long time. So now we're trying to catch up on that as much as we could.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent. So just to finish up, what do you think is the next real hurdle for the revolutionary spirit? What's the next thing that needs to be?
I think it's not even the next hurdle. It is the hurdle we're facing now. Brain drain is a cancer that we're dealing with at this point. And frankly, it causes a lot of us are worried, thinking about what it could cause, and it's actually now causing a lot of issues, and it's affecting the country negatively. The other issue related to it, at least from my perspective, is building a sense of identity and belonging. Because when you grow up in a culture that has suffered from, we had colonization for a long time.
Sure.
And then we went from that to a dictatorship, and then to another. All of that, those like more than 100 years of complete detachment of your country, is going to affect you.
And one could affect the other.
Yeah.
Because a stronger sense of identity can maybe stop the brain drain, no?
Yeah, exactly. That's why I told you it's related to it,
Yeah.
and I think they go hand in hand. But I think to stop brain draining, we have to work on the identity element of the issue, but also we have to face facts, and we have to talk about the economic issues that we're facing, and the government not being able to help. I don't believe it's the job of the government entirely to provide people with jobs. However, it has to play a part in it.
Sure.
Yeah.
No, but there's definitely has to be a balance.
Yeah, there has to be. They have to have a role in trying to fix this issue of unemployment in Tunisia, and I don't think they're going the right way about it. I would have a different approach, but who am I to judge? You know,
But just
so
to let the
these-
folks, people, just
Yeah.
who are listening might not be aware, you have many people who go, especially IT folks,
yeah,
who leave-
engineers, doctors,
engineers,
teachers,
doctors,
yeah,
teachers,
yeah,
and
nurses.
often go to France, no?
Yeah, yeah, and I think, and that has been the policy of France for a long time. I think France has had this unhealthy rapport with Tunisia in terms of economy and politics for a long time. I think there's still that vertical relationship with
Mhm.
Tunisia and France, where France benefits so much from Tunisia, and any investment that France has in Tunisia you can't even call it investment. It's just a way for France to benefit more from the country. Brain drain is one of those issues.
Right.
I think
They're harvesting the best and the brightest in a sense,
Absolutely.
bringing them to France.
absolutely.
and It's not
And
benefiting.
you look at its immigration policy, for example. They're harvesting the best of our minds, but they're not allowing a lot of the Tunisians who do not have a good chance in Tunisia to be there. So I'm going to get the best, but I'm not going to give a chance for the person who is an average or below average to have a better life. Like
Who
you
just
can
needs
keep that in your
A
country,
normal job,
deal with
so to
it,
speak. Yeah.
right? But I'm going to get the best who can actually give a plus to France, which is, I think, not to blame France. I think they're going after their own interest. However, our government, I think, needs to stand up for us as
Sure.
citizens and have more respect for us by trying to have more of an equal relationship with France, in that regard at least.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, that was really good. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for coming on.
For the
I think it
invitation.
was an excellent talk, and hopefully we'll
Thank
talk again.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Thank you so much.
So this is Robert Bonomo for Conversations from Carthage.